Okay, Riffs, Rants, and Ramblings, another NBA episode, probably the last one I'm going to do before the season starts. The offseason finally seems to have calmed down after an absolutely crazy beginning. That's basically what I'm going to talk about in this pod, is just the biggest moves that happened this NBA offseason, all the stars switching teams, and my thoughts on those moves, and talk a little bit about the NBA landscape and how it's changed, especially during this free agency. And then I'm going to get into my own NBA power rankings, ranking the teams from 1st to 30th, and then breaking down how I think next season is going to go with the top 8 playoff seeds for each conference. So let's get into it. Obviously, the biggest move of this offseason was Anthony Davis going to the Lakers. We all heard the stuff about David Griffin not wanting to trade Anthony Davis to the Lakers, but it seemed right away that he was going to go to the Lakers. Now, as a Celtics fan, I was actually really thrilled about this because I didn't want to have anything to do with Anthony Davis. I was actually really scared we were going to trade half of our team for this guy, this cornball, right after getting rid of Kyrie, another cornball, and then have him just leave after a year because he wants to go to LA. So when I actually heard the news break that he'd been traded to LA, I was really happy. Even though I hate the Lakers, I was happy that he went there because I'd rather have him there than on my team. The trade package that the Pelicans got was incredible. They got Lonzo Ball, Josh Hart, Brandon Ingram, 3 first-round picks, and a pick swap. It's one of the biggest trade packages we've ever seen in the NBA, and I think the Pelicans did really well. Now, that's not to say that my Lakers hate doesn't also allow me to acknowledge that they got an incredible player. Anthony Davis, statistically, is an incredible player, and I don't want to take that away from him, but there are some caveats for me with Anthony Davis. First of all, like I said, I just think he's a cornball. I think that whole debacle last year with the Pelicans was a fucking disaster and really shameful. The guy's under contract for 2 more years, and he wants to go to LA and play with his buddy, and so he just stops playing? It's really crazy and really disheartening, and it's really set a bad precedent throughout the NBA that I feel like is going to have lingering effects. Like, who's to say now that contracts mean anything? That guys aren't just going to look at what Anthony Davis did and just stop playing when they want to and pout until they can go where they want. So I just thought it was a really immature move, and that was one of the main reasons why I didn't want him to have anything to do with my team. Now, it's not just the fact that he's a cornball that decided to wear a Looney Tunes shirt saying, "That's all, folks," on his last day of playing for the Pelicans. Don't even get me started on that. He's also a guy, similar to Kyrie, who I hate, that just doesn't stay healthy. He misses 10, 15, 20 games every year. He's had a lot of injuries, nothing serious, but enough where he misses a significant portion of every single season. And I'm also just not sold on him as a leader or as a winner. I know he won at Kentucky on a loaded team, but he hasn't really shown in the NBA to affect winning at all. The Pelicans have been regularly awful during his tenure there, and I know that they don't have a very talented team. But you got to remember, this is a guy who every single year they talk about him as being arguably a defensive player of the year. So I wanted to look this up because I thought it was funny that I don't ever remember the Pelicans really being that great of a defensive team, despite the fact that they had Anthony Davis, who's always in the conversation for Defensive Player of the Year, and they also have had Drew Holiday for a long time, who's a very, very, very good defensive point guard. So I went back and I looked at the last 6 years, the defensive team ratings for the New Orleans Pelicans while Anthony Davis has been there, and it's not great, as I thought. Last year they were 22nd. Now I know he sat out a lot of the season pouting like a baby, so maybe you can say that was the reason why. The year before, 17-18, they were 8th. In 16-17, they were 21st. In 15-16, they were 25th. In 14-15, they were 13th. And in 13-14, his second year in the NBA, they were 21st. So that's awful. They've been regularly and consistently awful defensively, and yet Anthony Davis is supposed to be this incredible defensive player. Now, just for comparison's sake, I went back and also looked up Kevin Garnett's history on the Timberwolves, because in my mind, Anthony Davis and Kevin Garnett are kind of similar players. Similar size, similar set of abilities, and also a similar reputation for being defensive stalwarts. And not just that, but the Timberwolves, when Garnett was there, they were not a great team either. They probably weren't quite as bad as the Pelicans have been, but they never really had an elite team either. That being said, let's look at a 6 or 7 year span for Kevin Garnett when he was on the Timberwolves up until the season where he was 27 years old, which is basically what age Anthony Davis is now. So in 96-97, Team defense, the Timberwolves were 15th. In 97-98, they were 13th. In 98-99, they were 17th. In 99-2000, they were 8th. In 2000-2001, they were 12th. In 2001-2002, they were 6th. In 2002-2003, they were 4th. And in 2003-2004, when he was 27, they were 2nd. I'm sorry, Anthony Davis, but I'm just not convinced that you really have a huge effect on the basketball court. I'm going to have to see it. We'll see what happens with him in LA next year. It's going to be interesting, obviously having LeBron James and Anthony Davis, but LeBron is old, and not just age-wise, minutes-wise, he's already played more minutes than most NBA players ever. When you count playoff minutes, I think he's 3rd in NBA history already. So while I think it's fantastic that you've got 2 top 5 players, I do think there's some real concern with what LeBron can do at this age. We know he didn't play defense last year. And if Anthony Davis can even stay healthy enough to really lead that team. I think they'll be really good next year, but I do think there's a possibility for this to get ugly pretty quickly. Now, the other really big move was Kawhi deciding to go to the Clippers, which was fascinating. Nobody seems to understand Kawhi's motivations or what he wants, and the move to the Clippers definitely surprised a lot of people. There was a moment there where it seemed certain that he was going to join LeBron and Anthony Davis in the Lakers, which I thought would have been fucking crazy. I would have hated it. I actually thought he was going to stay with the Raptors. I would have been fine with that, even though it would have been bad for my team, the Celtics, because it would have meant that the Raptors were going to be a really, really strong team, better than us for sure next year. So him going to the Clippers is actually best case scenario for me, not just as a fan of the Celtics, but as a fan of the NBA, because it opens up the Eastern Conference for my team to do better, but it also opens up the entire NBA. So now we're looking at a year next year where you can make an argument for 8, maybe 9 teams that could win the championship. And I'm not sure I can remember another year that's been like that where there hasn't been a definitive favorite or 2. Now, obviously, there are some teams that have a much better chance. When you look at the Bucks, you have to say that they have a really good chance. Now, when you look at the Clippers, you have to say they have a really good chance. But the NBA feels really, really open, and I don't think that would have been the case if he would have gone to the Lakers, and I'm not even sure if it would have been as much of a case if he would have stayed on the Raptors. I would have loved to have seen him just go to the Clippers without Paul George. I'm really quite fucking tired of all this buddy, want to play with another star, or 6, want to make it easier. I really thought Kawhi was the kind of guy that would just go to the Clippers and just carry that team because that's what he did with the Raptors. So I was a bit disappointed that he needed to recruit another guy, but I guess that's just the way the NBA works now. Obviously, another huge storyline this offseason was Kyrie and Kevin Durant deciding to go to Brooklyn. Which I'm laughing because, God, the Knicks. Oh, the poor, poor Knicks. God, it must suck to be a Knicks fan. You're living in arguably the greatest city in the United States. You've got Madison Square Garden, and you just can't get anybody because of that stupid, fucking, fathead, dickhead James Dolan. God, he's a fucking idiot. I'm not angry about it because I'm not a Knicks fan, but I swear to God if I was, I would hate that guy more than life itself. He's such a fucking nonce, and he's really the reason why New York cannot get superstars. They cleared out all this salary space to go after Kyrie and Kevin, and then to watch them go to the Nets is just, oh man, it's high comedy. So I didn't really love this move for the Nets, but I totally understand why they did it. They've never really been able to attract superstars before to Brooklyn, so they had an opportunity to get 2 superstars, and they went for it. I totally understand. That being said, Kevin Durant's not going to play at all next year, and when he does come back the year after, no one's really sure what kind of player he's going to be. You know, an Achilles injury is one of the worst injuries you can have as a basketball player. There have been very few guys that have come back from that injury to have productive careers, so that's something to definitely look out for. Now, as far as Kyrie, I mean, I've gotten into Kyrie at length on my Celtics podcast, why I hate him and think he's incredibly overrated, and I don't even really think he's that big of an upgrade over D'Angelo Russell. I do think he's a better player, statistically a much better player, but I'm just not sure that he's going to make that team any better. I don't think the Nets are going to be really any better than they were last year, maybe slightly. The real thing to watch for is the year after when Kevin Durant comes back. That's when it's going to be interesting to see how those two play together and whether they can elevate the Nets to something special. Another big move this offseason was Jimmy Butler deciding to go to Miami, which was kind of a shocker. I mean, I guess nothing can shock me at this point about Jimmy Butler because he seems like a real dickhead. I know he's competitive and he works hard, but if everywhere you go, you have a problem with other people, usually in those situations, it's you. I've worked with quite a few people like this. You always blame everyone else for your problems. It's probably you. And that just seems to be the case with Butler. He's never happy anywhere he goes. I guess he wasn't happy in Philadelphia because there were just too many good players. Wasn't happy in Minnesota because the good players weren't good enough. Wasn't happy in Chicago because they weren't good enough. Not sure what he thinks is going to happen in Miami. Miami sucks. I mean, they're not great. So my theory on this is that because there was a story for a long time that Jimmy just wanted to win. Well, we know that's not the truth now because if he wanted to win, he would have stayed in Philly. Philly was super, super close to making it to the finals last year. So if he really wanted to win, he would have stayed. But instead, he went to Miami, which shows me that really what Jimmy wants is he wants to fucking smash. That's what he wants. He wants to go in clubs in Miami, have a bunch of girls squeezing his dick, whispering in his ear, "Oh, Jimmy Butler, you're so great, you're so great, you're the best I've ever seen, I love you, will you dance with me, will you fuck my friend?" I mean, really, why else would you go to Miami other than you just want to hang out on the beach, you want to go to the clubs, you want to bang a bunch of Latin girls with big-ass booties? I mean, there's no way that team is going to be more competitive than the 76ers. So, Jimmy, sorry, buddy, but we know what your priorities really are now. Now, probably the last huge move that happened this offseason was Westbrook getting traded to the Rockets. And this was kind of wild because for a long time they've been talking about Russell Westbrook's contract and Chris Paul's contract both being albatross contracts that were basically untradeable. So it was pretty crazy to see that these two horrible contracts in the NBA ended up just getting swapped for each other. Really interesting stuff. And I can kind of understand it from both perspectives. Obviously, after Oklahoma City traded Paul George to the Clippers, they wanted to get rid of Westbrook as well and initiate the rebuild. There couldn't have been that many takers for Westbrook and his awful contract. So I can understand why they looked at Chris Paul. His contract is really, really bad also, but it ends 1 year before Westbrook, so in that way it's kind of an upgrade. Plus they were able to get 2 first-round picks out of it, and that obviously helped sweeten the deal a lot. So it made sense for Oklahoma City. It also made sense for the Rockets. Basketball-wise, Chris Paul makes a lot more sense next to James Harden than Westbrook does because Chris Paul is a much better shooter. He's much better off the ball, but he also can't stay on the basketball court. He's injured all the time, and they hate each other, which is a huge problem. So basically, they upgraded to a guy that actually gets along with Harden. They like each other, and there's no question that Westbrook is a better player than Chris Paul. He just is. He's a much better player. He's younger, and he's better. He's just a really bad shooter. And basketball-wise, you've got the 2 highest usage rate guys on the same team. 2 guys that need the ball, that usually just stand around and don't do shit off ball. So basketball-wise, the move seems like a disaster. Something in me just tells me that because they like each other, they're going to find a way to make it work. And if Houston was so close to getting to the finals last year with Chris Paul, there's no reason why they shouldn't be able to do the same or even better with Westbrook. So for me, I thought the move was kind of cool. Makes sense for both teams. If nothing else, the Rockets are going to be a fascinating watch next year because it could go so many different ways. Now, some of the smaller moves were Kemba Walker going to the Celtics, which I've already talked about on the Celtics podcast. Al Horford going to the 76ers, which I thought was an incredible move for them. Maybe it doesn't match their timeline, so to speak, with their young players, but they seem to want to win now, and Horford should definitely help them do that. Brogdon went to the Pacers, which is going to basically be him replacing Bogdanovich, who went to Utah. So those are all interesting moves as well. And then D'Angelo Russell in the sign and trade to Golden State, where they can basically have him hoisting up shots until Klay Thompson comes back. That's a lot of star power moving in one offseason. I've never seen an offseason like this before. It's the craziest one of my lifetime, and I'm not really sure how I feel about it. For one, it's awesome to watch and follow. It's almost like a whole nother season of basketball, whereas normally you wouldn't really be paying attention to the sport. This offseason was fucking mental, and you couldn't just help but watch and be surprised at all these crazy moves. But there's another part of me that's not really a big fan. It just seems like the players are more selfish than ever. There's no loyalty to teams. I even saw a stat that Steph Curry is now the longest tenured player in the NBA, 10 years with Golden State. To me, that's crazy. In some ways, to me, it's analogous of how we approach relationships in my generation, whereas my parents' or grandparents' generation were much more willing to be involved in a long-term relationship, even while being miserable. Nowadays, we're very much selfish in that regard, where if we don't feel like we're happy or completely satisfied with our partner or our team, then we'll just call it quits and we'll just look for something better. And that seems to be the same mentality that a lot of these star NBA players have as well, where if they're in a situation where they don't feel like they're being gratified to their fullest, then they're not afraid to just walk away, even when they're still under a commitment. Players just don't stay with teams anymore. Why would you buy a jersey when your guy might not even be on your team next year? Why wouldn't you trade draft picks when by the time your player that you drafted starts to turn into a productive player, he's probably just going to leave to go to another team? And the last thing about it that really, really bothers me is the continual threat to small market teams. I mean, you look at the big moves this offseason. Kawhi went to LA. Anthony Davis went to LA. Kyrie and Kevin Durant went to New York. And Jimmy went to Miami. Everybody is just going to the big cities and where they want to play. And it just starts to feel like if you're a team like Milwaukee or you're a team like Toronto, even though they're great right now, you just have to be so lucky to find a player in the draft because you're not going to get guys in free agency. And then with a team like Milwaukee, you got a guy like Chris Middleton, who really isn't a max player. You have to pay him the max. You have to, because you're not going to get other players. So that part of it kind of bums me out. So let's get into the power rankings for next year. I'm going to rank the teams 1 to 30 in the NBA and just sort of go over some of the moves they did in the offseason and why I think they are where they are. So number 1, I have the Milwaukee Bucks. Last year, they were the only team to win 60 games. In the offseason, they lost Malcolm Brogdon, which is a big blow, Tony Snell, and Nikola Mirotic, but they also added Robin Lopez and Wesley Matthews. Now, while I think the moves with the guys coming in and out make them a little bit worse, you also have to remember that Giannis is still young and getting better every year, and there's a lot of continuity as well with that team. They know who they are, and so that's why I'm giving them the number 1 spot. Number 2, I have the Clippers. We've seen how incredible Kawhi Leonard is, the best two-way player in the game, for my money, and he carried the Raptors to new heights last year, and I don't think there's any reason why he shouldn't be able to do the same, even with load management, for these LA Clippers. They also got Paul George, and if he can stay healthy, I think this Clippers team could be really, really, really good. If you think about Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, and Pat Beverly all on the court at the same time, that's the scariest thing defensively for the perimeter that I've ever seen. And it could be a real, real juggernaut defensively. You also can't forget that they still have Lou Williams and a bunch of other great guys coming off their bench. So they're deep and they're talented. At number 3, I have Denver. Denver basically kept the same team, but they replaced Trey Lyles with Jeremy Grant, which for me is an upgrade. Plus, their 2 best players, Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray, are still young and should get better. At number 4, I've got the Houston Rockets. They could absolutely be the 4th best team in the league. They could be really bad as well. I mean, it all depends on how James Harden and Russell Westbrook are able to figure out that basketball match that doesn't seem like it makes sense, but the star power is there. Again, you're talking about 2 top 10 players on the same team. I personally think they're going to find a way to make it work and be a really good team. At number 5, I've got the 76ers. I actually really liked their moves in the offseason. It felt last year like there were just too many good players. It just didn't make sense. There weren't enough shots for everybody. Like Tobias Harris was barely getting any shots, and Jimmy Butler seemed unhappy. So getting rid of Jimmy Butler, even though you're losing maybe one of their best players, I actually think that, again, it's sort of like addition by subtraction. They traded him to Miami and got back Josh Richardson, who's not as good as Jimmy Butler, but he's still a really nice player. And I think that this will allow Tobias Harris to get more shots and more touches, and he should have a better year as well. And then you can't forget that they got Al Horford. Now, the end of the deal that they gave him is going to be ugly. I can remember when we signed Al Horford 4 years ago, people were like, ooh, that's too much money for an old guy. I think he was 29 at the time. Well, now he's like 33, I believe, and they've just given him another 4-year deal. I think it's going to be fine for the first year or two, and the last 2 years is going to be a disaster. But last year, the only guy that really gave Embiid problems was Al Horford. And now they're teammates, and I think that they're going to play so well together. Get Embiid away from the three-point line where he sucks. Get him on the block. Get Al out by the three-point line where he's quite good. And that's a really scary defensive team. They're still missing shooting. Anytime two of your three best players are Ben Simmons and Embiid, you really need outside shooters to balance that, and I don't think that they necessarily have that. So it's still kind of an interesting team, but I think they're going to be really, really good next year. At number 6, I have Utah. I really like the moves in the offseason. They were already a really good team last year. They won 50 games. And in the offseason, they lost Jay Crowder, Ricky Rubio, Derek Favors, and Kyle Korver. But they added Mike Conley, Bojan Bogdanovic, Jeff Green, and Ed Davis. One of the biggest problems they had last year was they didn't have a lot of shooters. They didn't have a lot of offense outside of Donovan Mitchell. And I think adding Bogdanovic and Conley is going to really, really help that. This team could be really good defensively with the Defensive Player of the Year, Rudy Gobert, and offensively with the combination of Mitchell, Bogdanovic, and Conley. We'll see. Maybe I've put them too high, but I think they're going to have a really good year. At number 7, I've got the Portland Trail Blazers. They won 53 games last year. In the offseason, they lost Evan Turner, Mo Harkless, Al-Farouq Amino, and Enes Kanter. I think Harkless and Amino, losing those two guys, hurts them. They were really good defenders on the wing. They got Bazemore and Hazanja to replace that, and I don't think they really do, and that is definitely an issue. They also got Hassan Whiteside. He's basically just going to fill in for Yusuf Nurkic until he gets healthy. Then they might be able to use him as a trade chip to acquire something else. At number 8, I've got my Boston Celtics, and maybe you can call me a homer for putting them above the Los Angeles Lakers, but I actually think the Celtics are going to be pretty darn good this year. They won 49 games last year, and I think they're going to do just about the same this year. I think I predicted 50 to 52 wins on my podcast, and I think it's a reasonable expectation. When you look at it on paper and you see that they replaced Al Horford and Kyrie Irving with Kemba Walker and Enes Kanter, of course you're going to say that's a downgrade. It's a huge downgrade, especially Horford to Kanter. But watching last year's Celtics taught you can't just look at a team on paper, talent-wise, and say how good they're going to be. So I just think the combination of personalities that they have on this year's team is just going to be much, much better and allow them to at least play hard and play for each other, which a lot of times last year it didn't feel like they were doing. The Celtics have also always been really shit at rebounding. So while Kanter is going to really hurt us defensively, I do think we're going to rebound the ball a lot better, and that's going to help. We also got some really interesting rookies in the draft, and I don't know how much of an impact they're actually going to have next year, but there's certainly the potential that they will have an impact, whereas last year we really only had Robert Williams, and you never got the feeling that he was going to get any significant minutes. At number 9, I've got the Lakers. Obviously, they've got LeBron James and Anthony Davis, and not much else. I will say that I like the moves to surround those guys with shooters much better than what they did last year, where they just got a bunch of scrubs that couldn't shoot and talked about toughness, which nobody thought made sense. They were able to get Danny Green, Quinn Cook, Jared Dudley, Troy Daniels, Avery Bradley, and they even got DeMarcus Cousins. They could be really good. They could be much better than 9th. But I've already sort of mentioned before how I have real concerns about what LeBron is going to really be able to do next year as far as how much mileage he has. Because when LeBron was the best player in the game, it was because he was a two-way menace. And what we saw last year from him was that he was still really good offensively, but he really wasn't trying defensively at all. And I don't think that you can be a top 5 team if your best player or second best player isn't playing defense. And also Anthony Davis and whether or not he can stay healthy. We've never really seen him lead a good team in the NBA, so it's kind of an experiment in that way. At number 10, I have the Golden State Warriors. Obviously, the Golden State Warriors are taking a huge, huge step back because of the loss of Kevin Durant and the injury to Klay Thompson. And then obviously they lost DeMarcus Cousins as well, and Iguodala. They still have Steph Curry, one of the best players in the game, and they were able to kind of replace the offense that Klay Thompson gave them with D'Angelo Russell for now. So I still think they're going to be good. Obviously, they're not going to be the team they were before, and this is probably why all these other teams made all these crazy moves. Everybody sees the fact that the NBA is wide open now, and they're going for it. At 11, I've got the Indiana Pacers. They won 48 games last year, and that was with Oladipo being hurt for the majority of the year. Oladipo should be back this year and healthy, which makes a huge difference. They did lose Bogdanovic, who was probably their best player last year, but they replaced him with Malcolm Brogdon. So I think they did a good job of replacing what they lost. Now, they also lost Collison, Wesley Matthews, Thaddeus Young, Corey Joseph, and Tyreek Evans. But they also added TJ Warren and Jeremy Lamb. So, as I said, they lost a lot of pieces, but I think they got a lot of good pieces back. And obviously the biggest piece they're getting back is a healthy Oladipo. I think this team could be really good. At 12, I've got the Toronto Raptors. Now, they won 58 games last year. They were the second best team in the NBA. They won the NBA title, but they've also lost Kawhi Leonard. I'm really not sure how good they're going to be next year. I know they're not going to be horrible because I love Pascal Siakam. He's awesome. Kyle Lowry's a good player. Gasol and Ibaka are good players, but they're getting older. And I just can't overstate how much it hurts losing Kawhi Leonard and also Danny Green. And when your only addition in the offseason is Stanley Johnson, that's not a great sign. At 13, I have the Spurs. They won 48 games last year. They didn't make that many moves. They traded Davis Bertans because they thought they were going to get Marcus Morris, and then Marcus Morris changed his mind and went to New York, so they added DeMar Carroll and Trey Lyles. I don't expect the Spurs to be much different than they were last year, around the middle of the NBA, and I think they're going to be right around there again. At 14, I have the Nets. Some people might think that's a bit low, especially considering that Karis LeVert is coming back from injury, and he should help them be a better team. They lost D'Angelo Russell, Jared Dudley, Hollis Jefferson, and Alan Crabb in the offseason, but they got Kevin Durant, who won't play at all next year, Kyrie Irving, who will probably play 60 games next year, DeAndre Jordan, who really shouldn't even be playing anymore, and Prince. Now, Taurean Prince is actually quite a nice player. I just wonder about the chemistry. This team for so long has built guys that didn't have big egos and played together really well, and now they're adding one of the biggest egos in the NBA and a guy who has horrible chemistry skills in Kyrie Irving. I don't think they're going to be that much different next year than they were last year. Last year they won 42 games. I think they're going to be right around that again. The reason I have them 14th is just because I think a lot of other teams got better. At 15, I have Miami. They lost Whiteside, Richardson, and Dwayne Wade, and they added Jimmy Butler, Tyler Hero in the draft, and Myers Leonard. So last year they won 39 games. I think they're going to be closer to 500 this year, maybe a little bit over. I mean, Jimmy Butler's obviously a really good two-way player. Tyler Hero has shown already he can shoot, and I don't think that losing Hassan Whiteside is that big of a loss. At 16, I've got the plucky Sacramento Kings, who won 39 games last year and almost made the playoffs. Unfortunately for them, the Western Conference just got a lot stronger, and they're probably still not going to make the playoffs. But they've got some really nice young players. De'Aaron Fox, Marvin Bagley III, and Buddy Hield is a really nice young core to build around. They were super fun to watch last year. They lost Willie Cauley-Stein, Alec Burks, Frank Mason III in the offseason, but they added Trevor Ariza, Dwayne Dedmon, and Corey Joseph, some veterans to go with their young guys. So I think they're still going to be a competitive team. At 17, I've got the Dallas Mavericks. They were not very good last year, even though Luka Doncic was really, really good and super fun to watch. And he's just going to get better. He's still super young. I think the biggest thing for them is the health of Kristaps Porzingis. So obviously he didn't play last year. He should be back this year. And if he can come back and stay healthy and contribute, that's going to make the Mavericks a very competitive team. But if he gets hurt again or he comes back and he's slow, then I wouldn't be shocked to see them struggle and finish right around where they finished last year. At 18, I have the Detroit Pistons. They were 500 last year. I think they'll be right around there again this year. They lost Wayne Ellington and Ish Smith in the offseason, but added Derrick Rose, Markieff Morris, Tony Snell, and Tim Frazier. A lot of decent small moves. I'm still not in love with their roster, but they do have enough players to be competitive. At 19, I've got the New Orleans Pelicans. Obviously, they lost Anthony Davis, Julius Randle, Elfrid Payton, and they added so many players, especially through the draft, with Zion Williamson, who everybody expects to be awesome. They also got Jackson Hayes, and they drafted another guy I really, really like, Nickeil Alexander-Walker. They also signed J.J. Redick, Derek Favors, and they got Brandon Ingram, Lonzo Ball, and Josh Hart in the trade for Anthony Davis. It's an interesting team. I'm really not sure what to make of it. They've definitely gone up to the top of the League Pass rankings as far as teams that you want to see. They just seem like they've got a lot of interesting pieces and young talent, and I think they're going to be really fun to watch. I don't necessarily know that they're going to be able to really compete in a brutally tough Western Conference, but the future is bright for the New Orleans Pelicans. At 20, I've got the Oklahoma City Thunder. They won 49 games last year, but it's really hard to compare that to what they're going to do this year because, of course, last year they had Russell Westbrook and Paul George, their two best players, who are now gone. Now, they still have Steven Adams, and they've got Chris Paul for now, and they also got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who's a really nice young player, and Danilo Gallinari, who can score. So it's a very strange team. They're obviously in rebuild mode. They got so many draft picks for their trades, and they're definitely looking to move Chris Paul for more assets, but at this time, they're not able to move him. So if you consider that he would be on the team and playing hard for them next year, then I think they could still win some games. If they find a way to move him for more pieces, then yeah, they're probably going to be one of the worst teams in the NBA. But still, with all those picks, there's stuff to look forward to in Oklahoma City. I have the Atlanta Hawks at 21. They added Jabari Parker, Evan Turner, DeAndre Hunter, and Cam Reddish in the draft, and they lost Taurean Prince, Dwayne Dedmon, and Kent Bazemore. And obviously, two of their best players, Trae Young and John Collins, are just young, up-and-coming players that should get better and better every single year. I think this team is really exciting and has a lot of really interesting pieces, and they're going to be super fun to watch. I don't think they're going to be good yet. That being said, I don't think that this year for the Hawks will be as abysmal as last year. Last year, they won 29 games. I think they could win 30, 35 games this year. At 22, I have the Orlando Magic. Their key addition in the offseason was Al-Farouq Amino, and they lost Timothy Moskov. Not really a lot of moves for the Orlando Magic. They're basically bringing back more or less the same roster. The guy they drafted is somebody who's coming off an injury, so he won't play all of next season, or at least most of it. So they were basically a 500 team last year, and I think they'd be lucky to repeat that. Their pieces don't necessarily make a lot of sense to me, and they also have Markelle Fultz, who I actually thought was living under a bridge somewhere, but turns out he's in Orlando. They're going to see if they can get anything out of him. At this point, I'd be doubtful, but who knows? At number 23, I've got the Minnesota Timberwolves. They had a pretty quiet offseason. They lost Derrick Rose, Taj Gibson, Dario Saric, and they got Von Lay, Jordan Bell, and Jarrett Culver. Really lost more than they gained, and they were already pretty bad last year. I don't know what to think about what the Timberwolves are doing. They're not doing much. I really thought they would go after D'Angelo Russell. I thought he would have fit that team really well. They didn't. And now they're just kind of stuck with Andrew Wiggins, who's consistently underperforming, Karl Anthony Towns, who doesn't seem to have any leadership ability, and just sort of a hodgepodge roster. At 24, I've got the Chicago Bulls. They lost Robin Lopez, but they gained Kobe White in the draft, Thaddeus Young, and Thomas Satoransky. They also have just a lot of young players that should get better. Wendell Carter Jr. is a really nice player. Otto Porter Jr. in a new environment might do well. Zach LaVine still could grow into more than just a chucker. And Lauri Markkanen's a really nice player. Now, they haven't proven that they can play together yet, as they won 22 games last year. But maybe this is the year they start to improve their chemistry. At 25, I've got the Memphis Grizzlies, another team that's not ready to win yet, but I really like what they're doing, and I think they're going to be a lot of fun to watch next year. They fully committed to their rebuild. Mike Conley's gone. Avery Bradley and Delon Wright is gone. Although they did bring in Andre Iguodala. They drafted Ja Morant, and they also brought in Tyus Jones, Jay Crowder, and interestingly, Josh Jackson, who I don't think is going to do much. Phoenix basically paid to get rid of him. Memphis decided to take a flyer. Why not? It was a low-cost move for them. Maybe he'll do better here. But even if he doesn't, you're building around a core of Ja Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr., Brandon Clark, who they also got in the draft, and then you got some other interesting pieces as well. I think the Memphis Grizzlies are going to be pretty bad next year, especially because they're in the Western Conference, but I do think they're going to be a lot of fun to watch. At 26, I've got the Phoenix Suns, who love to compete with the New York Knicks for having the worst owner in all of sports, Robert Sarver, who's just a real fucking knucklehead. Just a very strange offseason for the Phoenix Suns. Adding Ricky Rubio to that team just doesn't make a lot of sense for me. Dario Saric as well, good player. Aaron Baines, okay. It's just a weird mix. They added a lot of guys that seem like they would fit well on a win-now team, which the Suns are definitely not. I think it's going to be another miserable year to be a Phoenix Suns fan. At 27, I have the Washington Wizards. Speaking of miserable, being held at gunpoint by John Wall's disgusting contract. It's a real disaster for the Washington Wizards. They lost Ariza, Thomas Satoransky, Jeff Green, Jabari Parker, and Bobby Portis. They added Isaiah Thomas, who I really hope gets some minutes next year, Rui Hachimura through the draft, and a couple other guys. Really, this team is Bradley Beal. I think he played the most minutes in the NBA last year, and it's really sad to see him just playing really well on a team that's awful. And it seems like that's what's going to happen again this year. I really hope that somehow during the season, a team can find a way to trade for Bradley Beal. But for now, it's just going to be him and a bunch of scrubs playing losing basketball. At 28, I have the New York the New York Knicks, who just had a complete disaster of an offseason. They thought they were going to get Kyrie and Kevin Durant. They didn't because James Dolan's a fucking dickhead. They got RJ Barrett in the draft, who I think is going to put up a lot of numbers, and they're going to be really ugly. He just seems like the kind of guy that's going to shoot 40%, turn the ball over a lot, but also score a lot of points, get a lot of rebounds. And that's fine, because what else are you going to do with this team? They're a mess. Kevin Knox, one of the worst players in the NBA last year. Let's see if he can be better this year. Mitchell Robinson, who I actually kind of like. And then they just got a bunch of power forwards. Julius Randle, Bobby Portis, Taj Gibson, Marcus Morris. It's a team that really has no identity, no hope for the future, and they're not even going to be that fun to watch now. So well done, Knicks. At 29, I've got the Charlotte Hornets, who are desperately trying to outdo the Knicks for having the worst offseason. Obviously, they lost Kemba Walker. It's kind of unfathomable what's happened with the Kemba Walker situation. Like, if you're Charlotte and you think you're not going to keep him, because it is up to you if you want to keep him or not, then you need to trade him for assets. Instead, they just keep him the whole year, don't sign him, let him go for nothing, and then give $20 million a year to Terry Rozier? I mean, what the fuck are you doing? Oh my God. Terry Rozier for $20 million is just... That is why you are the 29th worst team in the NBA. At 30, I've got the Cleveland Cavaliers. They won 19 games last year, and I think it's going to be pretty much the same case this year. They drafted Darius Garland, who really doesn't fit next to Colin Sexton at all. I guess they're just going to try to become the really shitty Portland Trailblazers of the East. Not sure how that's going to work. You're going to have to just watch and see. It's not going to be pretty. It's still a team that doesn't have a lot of talent, and even the talent they do have doesn't really fit that well together. So that's my power rankings for the NBA, 1 to 30, if you're still alive or haven't fallen asleep yet. Basically breaking it down from Western to Eastern Conference. In the West, the first seed is the Clippers, second Denver, third Houston, 4 Utah, 5 Portland, 6 Lakers, 7 Golden State Warriors, and 8 the Spurs. In the East, the Bucks first, 76ers second, Celtics third, Pacers fourth, Toronto fifth, the Nets sixth, Miami seventh, and the Pistons eighth. Now, of course, these are just predictions. Who knows what's going to happen? I'll probably be wrong on a lot of this stuff. If you've somehow managed to listen to this whole video, give yourself a pat on the back. That's incredible. Give it a like, give it a share, subscribe. Leave me a comment telling me why I'm a fucking idiot, why Kyrie Irving's great, even though we all know he's not. Tell me what you disagree with. Where would you rank these teams? You think I said anything crazy? Let me know. Anyway, that'll probably be the last of the NBA stuff until the season starts, so I hope you enjoyed it, and until next time.